Impairment is a completely new topic that I've yet to go over, and I could have brought it up during our property, plant, and equipment tutorial. However, I figured that the intangible assets would be the best time to introduce this concept. So, on the left-hand side, I have the symbol of a unregistered trademark, and below it is the symbol for a registered trademark, and that's because we're going to figure out what to do with an impaired trademark, I think, in our second example. But before we go on and work with that example, let's go and talk about what impairment actually is. So impairment is a decrease in the value of an asset in which is a material amount. So it's a decrease or a material decrease in the value of an asset, and if you forget, a material amount is one that affects a user's decision. So it has to be significant enough to actually warrant a write-down. And a write-down is just reporting a loss or an impairment loss and then adjusting the value downwards of the asset to its fair value. So let's actually go and talk about the impairment of intangible assets. We're going to separate it into limited life and indefinite intangible assets. So first off, limited life. So we know that these type of intangible assets have a limited life. That's why it's called that. And we're going to say that there are 4 years on this. Well, let's say it's a piece or it's a patent for a phone. That's too boxy to be a phone. Okay, there's a rectangular. I guess touch phones kind of just look like a rectangular box these days, but I'll kind of shade in the screen. Okay, so that's supposed to represent a phone. And let's say, or before we actually go ahead and talk about the numbers, the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to actually conduct a recoverability test. And a recoverability test is looking at the undiscounted cash flows and comparing them to the carrying value. And the carrying value, if you forget, it's just cost less the accumulated amortization, and that's going to give us our carrying value. And let's just say that our carrying value is $10 million for this patent. So the carrying value on our books is $10 million. So the cash flows, I'm going to make them up, and I'm going to say that they're an estimate of $2 million for the first year, $1 million for the second year, and then $500,000 each for the third and fourth year. So $500,000 times 2, and that's going to be $4 million in total. And I should say that undiscounted cash flows at the moment, you can treat this as just the cash flows that I've shown on the side, as it's just a term that has to do with present valuing assets, and we've yet to go over that. But I thought I would include it since it is proper to actually include that term, since we're only looking at the undiscounted cash flows. So the undiscounted cash flows are $4 million. So we see that the amount is $4 million, and since our undiscounted cash flows are less than the carrying value, which is $10 million, we know that we're probably not going to recover our investment, and it's considered impaired. So once we know that it's impaired, what we're going to do next is we're going to actually write it down to its fair value. And let's say at the moment we don't know the discount rate, therefore we can't find the discounted cash flows, so we're just going to write it down to the undiscounted cash flows, which is $4 million. So because of, let's say, maybe some obsolescence of our patent technology or it becoming uncompetitive in our market, we've had to write it down to $4 million. So So of course we know that the difference between 10 million and 4 million is 6 million. So we're going to be recording a loss, I should say an impairment loss, for $4 million, or not 4 million, I should say, for 6 million, because that's the difference. And then we're going to be recording a credit to our patent to decrease its value by $6 million as well. And this impairment loss is going to show up in our continuing operations. I couldn't find an example exactly, but it does show up on the continuing operations segment of your income statement. Next up, let's talk about our indefinite intangibles. So our indefinite, and we know indefinite means that there is usually a renewal clause, which means that we're not exactly certain as to how long it's going to be useful for us or for our company. So the first thing is, at a timeline, we don't really know how long it's going to be useful for us. So the first thing is that we can't use the recoverability test. For indefinite intangibles, we can't use the recoverability test, because what's going to happen is since the future cash flows are going to extend into many years indefinitely, there's a likely chance that the future cash flows will almost always pass the recoverability test. And if it passes, then we never report it as impaired. So it's kind of indefinite intangible assets, since they last for usually many years, it's kind of unfair to use the recoverability test since it inflates the potential cash flows. So we don't use the recoverability test, and instead of comparing the cash flows with the carrying value, which we normally would do with the recoverability test, we just look at the fair value of what we think the asset is worth. So we look at an active market of an asset that's similar in nature, or we can figure out the discounted cash flows in which we think are going to stem from this asset. So let's just say that we have a trademark that is worth $50,000, and because of a company litigating us and actually trying to steal our trademark, we're not going to be able to continue with our litigation process, as we do not have sufficient amount of cash flow. Therefore, we're going to have to retire using the trademark. So it's actually going to be written down to $0. So the fair value is worth nothing, since it's going to provide no benefit for us. Therefore, we just report a loss on impairment, or impairment loss, of $50,000, and then we'll credit the trademark for $50,000 as well. So just remember that for finite or limited life, you first do the recoverability test, then you adjust it to its fair value. And indefinite, you never use the recoverability test, since it almost always will pass it, and then we'll never have to impair it. So both types of intangible assets can become impaired, and that's exactly how you would handle it. So I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. I think we'll be talking about goodwill and everything that goes along with that. If you have any questions regarding accounting or any other material within our videos, you can tweet us at Notepirate. You can like us on Facebook to receive updates, or to share any quick anecdotes about how our videos might have helped. And like always, thanks for watching us on YouTube.